I'm Tass Mellis of The Starters.
This is Ben Golliver with the Open Floor Podcast.
Hi, I'm Kristen Ludlow from NBA Inside Stuff.
I'm OG Anunoby of the Toronto Raptors.
Hey, I'm Elena Donon, and welcome to the Double Clutch.
Double Clutch.
Double Clutch. Double Clutch.
Double Clutch Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Double Clutch podcast. This week I am joined by Matthew Wellington, Mr. Double Clutch OG. How are you, Matthew?
I'm not too bad, Nick. How are you? Have you been enjoying the British heat wave?
Yes, the heat wave mixed with the traditional storms that then make everyone miserable. It's been fantastic. Working all through the heat wave. Obviously, the weekend is when it storms. Wouldn't have it any other way. So I am Nick Whitfield, one of your regular hosts, and let's jump straight into Around the Association. In Game 6 of the NBA Finals, Giannis and the Milwaukee Bucks secured a 109-103 victory over the Phoenix Suns to win the franchise's second NBA title. Going out with a bang, Chris Paul still dropped 26 points in the loss, and while Devin Booker didn't have the greatest of games, over the course of the series he really showcased on the biggest stage what an incredible offensive talent he is. Stealing the thunder, however, was Giannis Antetokounmpo. 50 points, including an unbelievable 17 of 19 from the free throw line, 14 rebounds, 2 assists and 5 blocks, really demonstrating how he now has a huge claim to be the most impactful two-way player in the world right now. As a so-called small market team living in the shadow of its bright lights neighbour Chicago, just a bit further down Lake Michigan's coastline, Milwaukee rightly went big with its celebrations. I remember when I started watching basketball, it was literally impossible to see full Bucks games. I was a big fan of Glenn Big Dog Robinson, though, so I was always on the lookout for highlights. I shared a story on Twitter this week following Game 6 that Glenn Robinson was actually the reason I went through a phase of wearing long socks to play basketball in as a teenager, which, of course, was a great look for me. I also think that the George Karl-led 2001 Bucks squad with Ray Allen, Glenn Robinson, Sam Cassell, Michael Redd, Tim Thomas and Skip to My Lou, Rafer Alston was one of the most fun teams to watch that no one ever seems to talk about. That team eventually lost to the Iverson-led Sixers in a controversial 7-game series in the Eastern Conference Finals. There were shouts of conspiracies about the NBA wanting a bigger market team in the finals. So where I'm going with this is it's fantastic to see a team like this that has largely been not very good for the time I've watched the NBA, really reach the summit of the NBA mountaintop. What's more, I think it's super flawed as a standalone measurement, but the fact TV ratings were up 32% this year showed that people were, in fact, interested in watching this so-called small market team. I hope Bucks fans worldwide and the city of Milwaukee enjoy every second of the celebrations. Commiserations, of course, though, to Suns fans. The Suns have enjoyed more success overall than Milwaukee during this same time period I've just been talking about, but that title still eludes the franchise for now. But with a young core and a veteran like Chris Paul running the show, if the Suns front office do their jobs well, this should just be the start of good things for this team. Moving on, the Tokyo Olympic Games are now in full flow, and there have been some notable games in the basketball already. The USA lost its opening game to France with the performance of Evan Fournier in particular, maybe giving Boston fans hope that next season will be better. Luka Doncic somehow scored 48 points in 31 minutes on the floor, shooting 18 of 29 from the field. He did this against a veteran Argentina team who would have come to the games expecting to compete for a medal. Putting his performance in perspective and comparing to the previous game, Luka actually scored more points than Kevin Durant, Damian Lillard, Zach LaVine and Drew Holiday combined in their respective first games. Popovich certainly has some work to do getting this team to perform at the level it is capable of. So, Matt, anything I missed out this week that you think deserves a mention?
Not that I can think of. I think you've done a very succinct job of covering up a fairly busy week and a bit.
Cool. So let's dive straight in with the finals then. And I think it's impossible to start anywhere other than Giannis.
Yeah.
Talk to me about Giannis.
I mean, we've it seems like we're record stuck on repeat the last sort of 2 weeks, because every time we've come on together, we've just gone on and on about how brilliant Giannis's performance is, and the YouTube comments over the past few weeks have backed that up, and especially over here in Europe, everyone seems to be getting sort of Giannis fever. So it was great to see him win that finals game, and great for the Bucks really, because if you look at them sort of since 2016 onwards, we've been doing this pod for like 9 years. We've seen the Bucks sort of go through the rebuild phase, get to where they are. They've lost in Eastern Conference Finals first rounds. They've lost in semi-finals. They've lost in conference finals, and to get to the finals and then win it in what looked like it was going to be not the most entertaining of final series, if I'm being completely honest. Like, everyone's out there saying, well, it's obviously not the best two teams, but considering the way the season went with COVID regulations and things, the teams that got there deserved it in the end. And Giannis just gave us one of those all-time NBA Finals performances. Like, to have 50 points, 14 rebounds, 5 blocks. They were legit blocks as well. Like, he was 100% effort throughout that whole game. It just felt like Giannis said to himself, look, I need to win this right now. Like, we do not want to be going back to Phoenix, because that's going to be a hard game to win. They had a great first quarter, 29-16 in the first quarter, and then they were down at halftime. And I think the Suns had a really good third, but eventually the Bucks and their role players, Pat Connaughton, Bobby Portis, everybody started chipping in, even PJ Tucker. Like, they got the consistency they needed from the other guys when they needed it. And yeah, it's a strange, like, ragtag bunch of guys that have ended up on this team together. But I mean, I would be a little bit emotional by saying I may have had a tear in my eye as I watched Giannis give his final speech and break down with Chris Middleton, and because all of the hatred and the stuff he's had from sort of the US media in particular over the last sort of 6 years has been, he's not good enough, he will never be good enough, Chris Middleton's not good enough. But at the end of the day, they've proved it wrong, and he can sit alongside Michael Jordan and Bob Pettit as two guys in the NBA Finals who've achieved the feats that he's achieved. So yeah, I think he's just silenced the critics that he had. I mean, he's the nicest guy in the game as well. So, like, if somebody comes out, I saw a Mo Moonsey tweeted the other day, if you don't like Giannis, then there's a problem with you, and I entirely agree. Like, he just seems to be one of those guys that, how can you have a problem with him?
And that leads me neatly into the question I really want to ask here, very specifically, which is both in terms of his character and his on-court performance. Does this playoff run, this collection of seasons he's had in a row now, and Game 6 in particular, does it change the way you think about him? Had the Suns had the Suns won the series, do you think you'd think about Giannis any differently?
I'm not entirely sure. I mean,
and I don't
knew
mean
he
the
was
media narrative. I mean, you specifically.
Yeah, no, I mean, I thought he was a great player. I wasn't necessarily to say I saw an NBA championship coming this year. I don't think I'd even put the Bucks anywhere close to the, well, they might have got to the Eastern Conference Finals, but I think me, along with everybody else on the planet, was picking the Nets to get through that and to walk it. But no, I don't think it changes sort of the narrative around him from my perspective. I mean, we've seen him grow up. We've sort of enjoyed the journey with him, from being the guy in the draft that people couldn't pronounce his name, and to where we are now. A few years back, Mike and Joe Hulbert at the time went over to Athens in Greece and went around the courts and stuff that Giannis had grown up on. As he became one of the sort of European cover athletes for NBA 2K. So no, I don't think it changes the narrative for me. Like, he was a great player, whether or not he won it or not. His story from where he's gone to where he is, from selling watches on the streets to being where he is now, he's succeeded no matter what happens. But adding an NBA championship before was he 26? Like, it's absolutely nuts. And to come from 2-0 down as well. I know in playoffs everyone says, well, it doesn't matter until you win a road game. But in that situation with Chris Paul, like the veteran presence, Devin Booker out there lighting them up, it felt like it was all going one way. But there were points in Game 2 where it felt like the series was turning a little bit, and then obviously in Game 3 and the rest of the games, we saw Giannis just go, hang on a minute, I am the better player here. I'm going to play like it, because he took advantage of Phoenix's lack of size in the end. So for me personally, it doesn't change the narrative on Giannis. I still think he would have had a good legacy with or without this, but he's done everything he can do now. It's like he said the other night, if he wins another one, great. If he doesn't, so what? He's done it in Milwaukee, and so many players these days don't ever achieve a title in the town that drafted them. They end up going somewhere else. So, yeah, I mean, what about you? What do you think about his legacy?
I think the thing that I really saw this season that I haven't seen from him before was he seemed to, and we talked about it a little bit the last time you were on, Matt, actually, but his smarts actually on the floor have really gone up. And what I mean by that is his ability to recognize and actually implement his physical advantages on the floor, not settling for jumpers, not settling for what the other team actually wants him to do, but actually going ahead, and even if it's the more difficult option, doing what the other team actively doesn't want him to do, which is get to the hoop, force his way inside, out physical every other player on the court, play both ends, run in transition, do all of those like things that sound simple, and they're the sort of thing where you get comments like James Harden make about the fact he has no skill or whatever. Damn good player for someone who has no skill, if you ask me.
Yeah,
more rings than Harden as well. So,
well, that's where the subtle jab comes in. At him saying I've won it here. Like it's a jab at all these other guys who, since LeBron, moved around a few years ago. Like everybody's kind of followed suit. And a question I would like to pose you actually quickly is: does Giannis's 1 in Milwaukee beat Kevin Durant's 2 in Golden State?
For me, yes, and I think that that's let me preface this by saying I'm a huge fan of Kevin Durant's game.
Yeah, as we
and you can't argue he is one of, if or not, or maybe the best player on the planet currently. But he hasn't helped himself with the teams he's chosen to play for and win or potentially win with, because certain sections of fan bases will always have the option to say, well, you just joined a team that was going to win anyway, and or at least with like 2 Hall of Fame level talents. And he's not the only one, of course, but the thing Kevin Durant will probably finish his career without is the kind of things that other players of his level have had, which is that like against the odds title. He's only ever going to win a title as like a big favorite to win it. So he's kind of like, obviously on the one hand, it's smart to do that. You stack the odds in your favor. But on the other hand, it's not inspirational for fans. It's not those are not the championships fans are going to be talking about in 20 years time. And that's in the same way, I think like Dirk's 1 in Dallas was worth way more than had he just joined another team had he joined Miami, say, and won 3 with those guys as like a bit part player. So I think it's incredibly meaningful for the franchise and for him and his legacy. And I think this is the other thing while I was talking about like legacy with Giannis, because for lots of fans as well, the whole thing about rings culture is that you need at least one to really cement yourself in a lot of people's minds as a certain tier of player. And it was undeniable already just what he could do on the floor. But the fact he's actually got the ring now, and he's got, you can't say he's not a winner. There's all these accusations that can't be thrown at him anymore, where he's kind of really elevated himself in terms of who you compare him to. And this is the other thing I was thinking about after they won, was he's such a unique player in that on both sides of the ball, I can compare him to certain players in certain ways, but every player I compare him to is like an all-time great.
Yeah.
And he does multiple things of that. So like on defense, I see Olajuwon. The other thing I can't compare anyone to is like he's probably the most switchable 7-footer on defense that's ever lived, because so I don't even think he has a comparison on that point. On offense, you can look at Shaq, but he can also he played point guard when Jason Kidd was the coach. He Euro steps. He does all kinds of stuff that Shaq couldn't do. So there's like a bit of a George Gervin in him, in like the way his touch around the rim and stuff. So yeah, he's such a unique player, and I think he's already at the kind of all-time great level. It's just how the rest of his career unfolds now as to like where he sits within that pantheon.
Yeah, he's done it all, and he might have a decade left, in terms of what he can do on the court. And in Milwaukee now, I don't know if it necessarily makes that franchise a destination to go and play with him, but you can bet your dollar that there'll be a good unit again next year in the Eastern Conference. And Giannis has realized his potential now. Like, he's got nothing in his mind that's sort of mentally blocking him out from achieving what he can achieve. So, and you've got to give some credit to somebody like, the general manager, John Horst, who over the last few years has taken a lot of flack, but has also made some good decisions. I mean, Brook Lopez came in as a free agent acquisition. He had a good run in the finals and massively helped them in terms of their size. And then some of the other guys that have just turned up there, PJ Tucker, Drew Holiday, guys who've turned up this year, have had a massive impact on this team. And what we noticed in the sort of the later stages of game 2, even though Phoenix won the game, was that Milwaukee were leaning heavily on their sort of defensive aspects, and they carried that through to game 3 and right the way through to game 6. Like, they were locking down Phoenix and making everything really tough. Like, they did not care if Devin Booker had 40 points as long as they could stop everybody else on that court from, having an impact on the game. And I think Chris Paul really struggled. Obviously, age probably played a part in that, but I think the fact that Drew Holiday was all over him made a massive difference. You had Ayton, in foul trouble. And if you just look at like the stats from game 6, like the team comparisons are absolutely ridiculous. Like 53 rebounds to 37 rebounds for the Bucks. Like, they truly took advantage of it. And some people are arguing and saying, well, that's the Suns. The Suns weren't the greatest team. And I do get that point, and maybe we'll talk about that later when we talk about sort of teams that overachieved. But it's the NBA Finals. Players tend to step up, and it looked like we were going to see that. Devin Booker and Chris Paul were having a great games 1 and 2, and then it just all sort of disappeared after that. But it became a final series of role players. As well as what Giannis was doing, you had guys just stepping up and guys who were, been cast out and thrown away from other teams. And that's what's funny when Giannis makes the statement about winning, at home and in Milwaukee versus what the guys at the Nets doing. You mentioned James Harden. James Harden's like, oh, he's not very skilled. It's like, James, you had the chance to build an entire team around you in Houston. They did everything they could to win you, to help you there, and you couldn't push it over the line. But Giannis has done it here. I understand the physical aspects of the two players is totally different, but it does make you wonder whether it's that mentality of, I don't know, maybe the European players have got a different mentality in terms of what it means to play for one team or whatever. But that's a long topic of conversation to have going forward, especially with the Olympics on at the moment and seeing how some of those players are playing. But I mean, the one thing that's crazy is you forget he was injured. Like, game 1, he was coming back injured, and I don't know if if people watched that game against the Hawks where he went down against Clint Capella, like, that was not a nasty. That looked really nasty, and you thought that was going to be a lot worse than it was. So he did an incredible job in the end to come back and play the way he did, and to carry, Milwaukee 50 points in 50 years. And then I think he had a 50 McNugget deal or something at one of the takeaways afterwards.
Yeah. And so I think Kirk made a very good point in the Twitch chat where we're talking about the attributes of Giannis. And so, like, in terms of like intensity and mindset, there's Kobe and MJ in there for sure, which is in like huge contrast to just like what a nice guy he seems like off the floor. But just one final thought I had on the finals was, and it's an unanswerable question, but it's something I'm going to be interested to see, is we've had 2 NBA finals in a row now where the winner has outsized the loser, be it the big Lakers roster with like Dwight Howard, Anthony Davis, and McGee coming in playing bully ball, and LeBron, and now we've had Giannis and Brook Lopez crashing the boards over a small Suns team. What I'm curious about is, does this reflect a trend of teams need to get bigger again, or is it just that the last 2 winners we've seen had Anthony Davis and Giannis, who are big but can still switch players on defense? Yeah, so that's what I'm curious to see, is whether that is actually part of a trend, or it's just because they had these unicorn players who were actually able to play small and big.
Yeah, well, that's the game. The game's evolved like in the last 5 years. It's crazy. I mean, it'll probably evolve again next year. Something will happen, and then teams will adjust. Like, you have to kind of keep on your toes, and we cover it and we can barely keep up sometimes. So to see the evolution of some of the players, and to go from where we were with the Houston Rockets signing Ryan Anderson as being this stretch guy who was just going to sit there and hit threes, to where we are now with Nikola Jokic picking up the MVP, lowest player ever drafted to win an MVP. I think it's absolutely insane the way the game has changed, and we'll have to see how some of these teams adjust to these bigs, but. Yeah, the Suns just got killed by their lack of size in the end, and I think it just shows you the way the game's changed. If you can get a guy like, a unicorn, to quote what they used to call Kristaps Porzingis in New York, like, you are laughing. And Anthony Davis is certainly one of those players, and Giannis is, also one of those players now. And now he's realised he can be aggressive. Now he's got that Kobe Bryant, Michael Jordan. I'm just gonna, I'm not taking any stick. And you mentioned it the other week. He's not this part of this AAU circle where he's friendly with everybody. He just wants to win games, and we saw that from him. And that was probably the most impressive aspect of his performances throughout the finals, was just the way he dragged himself. And that's one of the things I wanted to just bring up briefly. I mean, from my perspective, it's the best finals performance I've seen from a player since I've started doing this podcast. LeBron 2016 was good. I mean, he averaged almost 30 points, 10 assists and 8 rebounds that series, and that was a 3-1 comeback against the Warriors. But to see what Giannis was doing was, if he'd have been healthy, God knows what he'd have ended up doing for 6 games.
Yeah, I'd also put Dirk's 2011 in that category as well. I think he was just unguardable that whole playoff run.
Yeah.
And what about the Suns? We've talked all about the Bucks, obviously the winners. One thing that stood out for me about Phoenix was they have guys who played really well all year, all through the playoffs, and then seemed to disappear a little bit in the finals. And I think that was just a product of having the Suns really needed one more guy at least who could create their own offense, because really it's Chris Paul and Devin Booker, and everyone else has to play off them. Like, don't get me wrong, they played really incredibly well. They got like Mikal Bridges, Ayton had an unbelievable season, obviously, but they're not the kind of guys who are going to create offense out of nothing. So for me, when Phoenix looks at this season and what they can do to improve, for me, that would be really, they need a Jordan Clarkson equivalent. They need someone who's going to come in and create offense on their own without needing a play to be run for someone else to open up a corner 3 for them or something like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we mentioned it the other week. Like, we were sitting there thinking, who's going to be important for the Suns in this series? And we were coming up with Cameron Payne. Like, is Cameron Payne going to come out? And, I mentioned that lefty hook shot that he was taking, and it just always seemed to go in. Like, were we going to get more of that? We didn't necessarily get more of that. So we didn't get Cameron Payne stepping up. Mikal Bridges was up and down throughout some of those later games. And defensively, I think they were just exhausted by game 6. Like, there's a really memorable play from game 6 where Giannis he's back to his basket. He takes his man on, takes the shot, and it bounces off, and I think he out rebounds. Mikal Bridges is definitely there, and I think Jay Crowder's like got his ass halfway into Giannis and doing everything he can possibly do to stop him, and Giannis just goes nope, grabs the first rebound, puts it up again, and then it doesn't go in, and then he grabs it again off Mikal Bridges and ends up scoring. And that's what the big man playground is. Giannis is just toying with some of these guys right now, and it felt like they were physically exhausted, and they just did not have that extra person to come in off the bench to give them that injection of energy that they desperately needed. Because even the Bucks, you could kind of argue they were getting the injections off the bench, because whenever they sat Giannis, they were getting guys coming off the bench like Connaughton had some big moments in the game. So I think they do need somebody else. The Suns are a massive question mark, because what do they do with Chris Paul this off season? And I'm sure we'll get onto it in a minute, but like, yeah, they had an incredible year to get where they were, but they definitely needed more help in the deciding minutes of the game. And game 6 was fairly close. Like, it wasn't a blowout. So, if you're listening to this and you don't know the scores, we're not sitting here saying the Bucks blew them away, because they didn't.
Okay, and moving on from the finals a little bit, and thinking about the season more generally, without going into like huge amounts of detail, because I mean, we're probably going to do a season recap episode where we go into more depth on some of this stuff. But like, now that a winner has been crowned, what are like some of your favorite memories or moments from the season?
It's one that kind of sticks out. Steph Curry passing Reggie Miller for second place on the 3-point list. That was kind of a great moment and showed the evolution of the game, because I think he'd done it in half the amount of time or something stupid. Like I can't remember it off the top of my head. It was a while ago, but this season was so condensed that everything kind of blurred into one. The Mavericks had an insane 50-point lead over the Clippers at one stage during the season. I remember that being all everybody was talking about, because people thought the Clippers were collapsing, and then they made the playoffs. Another one's probably the Celtics 32-point comeback against the Spurs. Jason Tatum with the 60 points. But yeah, there's been some amazing moments. Russ averaged a triple-double again for the 4th season in a row or something ridiculous. Like, yeah, it was a fun,
funny
condensed
enough,
season.
his team was not very good again.
But we'll see. He might stick around and win a championship in Washington. You never know.
So for me, starting off with some allowable homerisms as a Knicks fan, just the Knicks being relevant this season was huge for me. Related Julius Randle's career season, Derrick Rose having a real storybook comeback year. Nikola Jokic and his play all through the season was just different level. It was a shame Jamal Murray went out, and the Nuggets couldn't really compete at the level they did last season. Steph just being Steph again was amazing to see. It was a shame the Warriors weren't better, but maybe I'll probably come to this a bit later, but they're actually in a potentially a very good position to be better next season. So we'll see. LaMelo Ball's rookie campaign, I loved. It was just super fun to watch. Plays the game the right way. Really love his passing and getting out in transition. Zion continuing to be one of the most unique players I've ever seen on a basketball court. And ending on a negative, but I think it has to be said this season, is about injuries, where particularly in the playoffs, it was really sad just to see how many teams were derailed by either their best or one of their best players being injured. And I think that'll always stick in my mind from this season, just because it felt like, it didn't take away from my enjoyment necessarily. It just felt like a lot of teams were compromised, which is a shame.
Yeah, and I just want to give a round of applause to the Toronto Raptors for, playing in Tampa, I think it was, all season long, and not doing it. They could have just given up completely, but they still won 27 games and made it look like they weren't trying to tank when they probably were trying to tank. So you've got to give Masai and Nick Nurse some credit over there for just, putting in an effort, and for those guys for playing, and probably Kyle Lowry's last season as well. So, they did it the right way, I guess is the way to say that.
And then if we look ahead to next season, let's give them the credit. They just won. The Bucks. Are they your favorite to win the title next season?
Oh man, I mean, this is where we have health and the draft and free agency and everything to sort of fight around.
Oh yeah,
so
let's pre-qualify this with
everybody's healthy.
We're talking about this before the draft, before free agency, before any trades this offseason has happened. But based on what you know today, Monday, the 26th of July, who's your favorite for next season?
I'm going to say the Brooklyn Nets, just because you'll get the guys coming back. We'll finally see the sort of Death Star of basketball in full motion. But, I'm not going to discount Milwaukee. They've got as good a chance as any, and they proved they can beat, Brooklyn. And at the end of the day, injuries happen. So injuries could happen in the same, they could be in the same scenario next year in the Eastern Conference Finals. And if it hadn't been for Durant's foot, it could have been a different story. But, and we could have been talking about Mike Budenholzer being fired because he's been the wrong coach. But we've flipped the switch and said, saying the opposite. So, I don't necessarily think they would be the favourites, but if Giannis plays like that for the whole season and they make a couple of neat additions, then why not? But the Lakers and the Clippers are probably going to come back a little bit stronger next year, depending on what happens with those franchises. I think it's going to be an interesting one, and it'll sneak up on us like it always does. It'll be here in a few weeks. Yeah,
I think Brooklyn has to be the favourite for me. You can't have Kevin Durant, James Harden and Kyrie Irving on one team and then not be the favourites, irrespective of who else the roster is made up of, because those guys are just too good to not be the favourite. And we kind of saw them almost beat Milwaukee with
Yes.
2 of the 3 for most of the series, and then only 1. So, or Harden was kind of limping around anyway. So, the fact they almost beat Milwaukee anyway tells me they're going to be dangerous if healthy next season. But the teams I see as contenders, if they make the right moves, are the Bucks. You can't rule them out. The Lakers, again, assuming health, and if they make the right moves. I'm going to give credit to the Suns as well. They were not really thought of as actual contenders for most of the season, fought their way to the finals. Again, if they get that third creator, I wouldn't rule them out. Denver coming back strong with Jamal Murray, hopefully fully healthy. The 76ers, we have to assume they're going to trade Ben Simmons. If they get a half-decent package for Simmons, they had the best record in the East this year. So I'm not ruling them out. And again, if there's a healthy Kawhi, which if I'm correct, I think Kawhi's injury may actually go into next season. But if come playoff time, he's even close to what his 100% now is, again, I don't think you can rule these Clippers out.
Yeah, there's all kinds of debates going about what the future is for Kawhi Leonard as well, because apparently he's been, I don't know, not talking to the Clippers or something. So, every year we seem to have Kawhi Gate is what I'm going to call it. So, we'll see what happens with him again this year. But no, I agree. I think Denver's actually a really good shout. Like, if they'd have been healthy, this might have been their year, and that might have been the case with the Bucks. Like, we mentioned them beating the Nets. It might just been their year. They took advantage of the situation. Teams, you have to do that. Like, and if Denver had been fully healthy, they might have taken advantage of the situation and come out of the West, and then they would have probably won the finals matchup because they had, the size to compete with the likes of Milwaukee. So it's the NBA. It's just one of those things.
This is super exciting. Via Rich Fang, via Woj, we actually have a live potential trade to discuss. So Memphis is finalizing a trade to send Jonas Valanciunas and 2021 number 17 and 51 picks to New Orleans for Steven Adams, Eric Bledsoe, and the picks 10 and 40 and a protected 2022 first round pick via the Lakers. So let's break this down. So if you are New Orleans, you lose Adams and Bledsoe, but you get Valanciunas and 2 draft picks. If you're Memphis, you lose Valanciunas, who was actually really good last season. You get Steven Adams, who will do some of the same stuff, and you get Eric Bledsoe to play alongside Ja. What do you think about this trade?
It's an interesting one. After the season Jonas had, I've just had a look quickly at Basketball Reference, 24.4 PER, 17 points, 12 rebounds a game. Like, he was a walking double-double for the Grizzlies last year. And they've gone and shifted him for Steven Adams and Eric Bledsoe. It makes me think it's a kind of, maybe we want a little more experience in this team, because obviously Steven Adams has been to plenty of conference finals and playoffs, so he might come in there and help them. Eric Bledsoe is an interesting one. Is that kind of to bring them a little bit of punch behind Ja Morant or something? Is it? I guess
he's going to be his backcourt partner, I would assume.
Yeah, maybe.
It's an interesting one. I feel like I have to think about this one. There doesn't seem to be like an obvious winner in my mind to this trade. Bledsoe's contract isn't fantastic for what we've seen from him the last few seasons. But they also move up in the draft. They move from 17 to the 10 in their best pick included. It feels like it suits both teams to me.
It could be part of this let's try and appease Zion, because there's already been rumours about him not being very happy with sort of the decisions the organisation has made in the last 6 months or whatever, which is absolutely crazy when you think about the scenarios and situations in the NBA at the moment. But Steven Adams is, we mentioned him 2 weeks ago when we did our European teams. Like, he's one of the better international players that you could acquire, and Eric Bledsoe can certainly contribute when he feels like contributing. So it looks like a win-win, but at the moment for both teams.
The thing I don't like, though, thinking about it more, is one of the weird and like bad fits for the Pelicans was Steven Adams as a limited like non-shooter takes up the same space Zion wants to be in, and you're not solving that with Valanciunas. So as good as he was last season, if he's either going to like occupy the same space or take away shots from Zion, it kind of is a bit of a head scratcher again. But yeah, I'm curious to see how this one works out. Not passionate either way. It's an interesting one.
Twitter is heavily favoring the Grizzlies right now as winning that trade by the looks of it. I'm just basing this off the thousands of replies that Woj is now is now getting. And a bon voyage to the fantastic jacket that Jonas Valanciunas had when he was in Memphis. So we're probably not going to see that again.
So moving back to contenders next season, one team neither of us brought up, but I feel like we have to talk about them based on their record this season, is the Utah Jazz.
Yes. Yeah.
How do you feel about them going into next season?
I'm not too sure. I mean, I think this year was probably their best opportunity to get to the finals, because everything sort of fell for them. The biggest question for the Jazz is, will they re-sign Mike Conley, is what I had written in my notes at the point of, what should we be looking at next season? I mean, that's a massive one for them because he always seems to get injured. So you've got to commit a decent amount of money to get him as well. They're already paying a lot. They're paying, there's a bunch of guys in that team who are getting paid a good deal of money. New ownership, like a whole new fever to the Jazz this season. And they had a phenomenal regular season, and it sort of all came to a halt again in the playoffs for them. So Donovan Mitchell stepped up. I mean, he was the fastest player in all time to 600 points in his season or something. So he had one of those all-time years. But yeah, I'm not really sure what happens with Utah now. I mean, Mike Conley's that big decision for them, whether they look around and see if they go out and maybe bring in somebody else. I don't know if Kyle Lowry would be a fit there, whether Kyle would even want to go there. There's all sorts of questions about where he wants to end up playing his basketball for the remainder of his career. But yeah, it's going to be a really interesting offseason for the Jazz after, Quinn Snyder had a phenomenal job again, and he's always been with that team. So I imagine he'll stay there, but it will be a case of who do they bring in? Do they bring in a couple of players instead of re-signing Mike Conley, or do they roll it back and try and go again next year?
It's a really difficult one for Utah and Utah fans because I felt like they didn't put a foot wrong the entire season. They played incredibly well. They played incredibly good basketball. And then they literally just weren't good enough in the playoffs, which is not a hugely positive sign, in my opinion, because it's not like they were as injured as a lot of other teams. It's not like you can point your finger on any one thing and say, oh, but next season this will be different. So I mean, it's good you mentioned Donovan Mitchell. He was incredible this season, and he's one of the best examples of how much people can improve at shooting in the NBA very quickly, where he was a very average three-point shooter for at the start of his career, and he became a just lights out three-point shooter this season. So it's one of those things where sometimes when you look at, we'll get to the draft in a little bit, but you look at draft prospects and it's hard to actually think, this guy is 18 and he's not a great shooter. And it's like impossible to predict other than like analyzing their form and stuff. But some of them, like Donovan Mitchell, go on to become unbelievable three-point shooters, and others just never do. So it makes it a difficult one to analyze.
And as a team, they fought through all the discourse that they obviously had during the bubble and put together a great season. Rudy Gobert, for all the stick he gets, had a great season. There's all kinds of rumors that they're open to trading Joe Ingles and Bogdanovic. So they're obviously thinking about what they can do to push them over that edge. But it's like you said, they didn't really have the excuses to not to perform the way they did in the playoffs. So, and that's probably one of the reasons they handled the Grizzlies. And after obviously Donovan Mitchell missed that first game, but after that it was a bit, I don't know, it was a bit all up and down and all over the place for them. So be interesting to see what they do going forward. I mean, a lot of Jazz sort of social media tends to say, well, why don't we just let Donovan Mitchell take the team over, let him run the ball all the time, let him facilitate the offense instead of worrying about a point guard, and then just bring in somebody who can, I don't know, contribute when he needs to contribute. So I'm sure they're thinking about it, and they're a lot smarter than us, so they'll probably come up with a good idea.
And the last team I want to talk about a little bit is the Warriors, who they actually have the number 7 pick in the upcoming draft, which many like real contributors and all-star level players have been picked at 7 or below. So if they nail their draft pick at 7, Andrew Wiggins had a really good season by his standards, and it's not impossible to believe someone might want to acquire him in a trade. So they also could make some moves. You have Klay Thompson coming back, which is obviously huge for that team. There's a route to the Warriors becoming very good again next season.
Yeah. Well, they're an interesting one. I mean, what happens with Bradley Beal? Like, we're not talking about the trade, but trade night, we could have all kinds of movement just to, if Bradley Beal suddenly says, so he hasn't asked for a trade yet from Washington, but if he said to that front office, look, I want out, then the Warriors have that they've made moves to say that they would like to fit him in there. And then you just think of a crazy team that's got Bradley Beal, Steph Curry, and Klay Thompson on it. Like, be interested to see what they do. I mean,
the other thing is, and building on what you're talking about, so Bradley, there's a lot of either current or former all-star level players who it wouldn't be surprising if they changed teams this offseason. So you mentioned Bradley Beal already. Yeah. Damian Lillard, there's been a lot of talk around whether he'll be in Portland next year. Kemba Walker in Boston hasn't quite fit. John Wall, for a rebuilding Houston team, doesn't really make sense. And he seemed healthy and decent last season. So Kevin Love is out in the wilderness of Cleveland still.
Again.
Ben Simmons looks like he's on the move. Porzingis seems incredibly unhappy in his kind of secondary role in Dallas. So it wouldn't be surprising if he moved it as well. So there's going to be pieces moving who can really change the fortunes of other teams.
Do you think we'll get a domino effect? Like, once Simmons moves, for example, then everyone else will follow suit? Or do you think teams are kind of holding off to see who comes up with the best packages first? Because, like, if you want to get Simmons, you're going to have to give up a lot. You want to get Damian Lillard, you're probably going to have to give up a lot too. So there's two pivotal free agents there that teams are going to have to sort of, clear the cupboard out for, basically. And even from what we're hearing from Bradley Beal, like, the Wizards are saying, we're going to fleece you. Like, we want everything we could possibly get for you. So if the Warriors are going to do it, they're going to have to give up that 7 pick, and they're going to have to probably put some players in there and some future picks as well. So Kelly Oubre was apparently not very happy with the way the organization treated him this year. So he might be somebody that they're willing to sort of move on. But yeah, trade season's always crazy. So I'm sure it'll kick off after we record this pod. That's what usually happens.
Yeah, and just the other thing on the Warriors as a route to improvement is James Wiseman was an interesting one to watch this season, where he had flashes of being really good, but he was inconsistent. But the player I'd compare him to is DeAndre Ayton. And what we saw from Ayton this season, if Wiseman followed a similar trajectory in his improvement, that would really be, and the Warriors for the next few years had like a legit trustable big on both ends, because he's got all the tools. He's a really athletic guy. He's got the size. He just needs the application, and I think he could be a real asset for the Warriors. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we don't even mention Andrew Wiggins. Like, Andrew Wiggins stepped up for them massively this season, especially defensively. Like, I know they weren't a great team, but he put in a real, performance for them and sort of started to sort of resurrect his career almost, in the way that people were always talking down on him. So that's one of those questions, like, do you bring in Bradley Beal for his offense and then get rid of the defense that Wiggins was bringing, or do you trust Wiggins a little bit more and see what he kind of can develop into, alongside some of those really mature finals winning players, and learn from them more and see where he ends up in a couple of years' time? And then you bring in maybe some other sort of role players to facilitate, a better season than you had this year. We still have anyway, because if Clay's back and if Clay's healthy, they'll be fine. But yeah, they've got a lot of questions, and the draft could be the sort of catalyst that sees a lot of these players end up moving.
And that's a great segue onto the NBA draft. So looking at the top picks, it goes Detroit, Houston, Cleveland, Toronto, Orlando, Oklahoma City, Golden State, Orlando, Sacramento, New Orleans, Charlotte, San Antonio, Indiana, Golden State, Washington, OKC, Memphis, OKC, the Knicks, Hawks, Knicks, Lakers, Houston, Clippers, Denver, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, Phoenix, Utah in the first round. So for me, and I've been in the fortunate position of seeing a lot of this classes games live at the top of the lottery end. I think there's 5 genuine guys who I am confident will be stars in the NBA, which is Cunningham, Mobley, Jalen Green, Suggs, and Scotty Barnes at the top 5. I'm pretty confident those guys are all going to be stars. And then you've got loads of other guys who are a bit hit or miss, like Josh Giddey out of Australia. You've got some sure things in terms of like guys who can come in and be shooters, like Corey Kispert from Gonzaga and stuff like that. So the only real point I'm trying to make here is that I'm actually really excited to see where these guys land, because I think this is a really deep draft, and there's going to be a lot of difference makers, and not only for who drafts them, but we were just talking about there may be like a accelerant in terms of trades and what happens with teams, and the draft may be one of them, where these young guys who are getting drafted may also make way for these big time players that are in their primes trying to move, like Damian Lillard, for example. So anything from the draft stand out to you? Any teams you want to see land a star?
I can't say I'm a draft expert, and that's usually why I leave it to somebody like Tom Hall, who likes to deep dive on these things. But Tom's a teacher, so he's more busy than me at the moment. I think Detroit are just looking for that spark. Like, they made some smart drafting decisions last year, and now they're looking for the big one. And if they get Cade Cunningham, which it looks like they are all in on, it's not 100% confirmed yet from what I gather, but 96% positive that they're going for him, then I think they will get somebody who's going to come in and try and be that guy who's going to be a catalyst for them going forward. And I don't know, I can't remember where I read it, but I saw there was a Luka comparison at one point, which I thought was a bit of a stretch. I mean, maybe more like a Jason Kidd type player was probably what I would be thinking, if just based on what I've seen of him. But
my comparison for him is more physical Penny Hardaway.
Yeah.
Or slightly smaller Ben Simmons who can shoot. Those are my comparison points.
That's an important point for a basketball player as well. Can shoot.
And he's actually a good shooter as well, not just can do.
Yeah. Houston at number 2. I mean, what the hell do? They traded everything to get rid of James Harden, and now they're in a situation where they've just got to rebuild to be better over the next 2 years. So we'll see what happens there. The interesting one for me is Toronto, like I mentioned earlier, with Kyle Lowry going, that opens up a possible starting guard spot for a rookie to come in. Maybe Jalen Suggs or something like that. I'm not entirely sure, but we'll see where they go. Oklahoma have got all of their picks lying around. Golden State, we've mentioned, they could be the first team that ends up moving their pick for others. But like you said, if it's the top 5 sort of draft where you're probably
top
guaranteed
5, I think, are guaranteed, and then there's another 4 or 5 who it's a bit of they could become stars. Yeah.
So anyone below that, you have to be open to maybe trading your pick. So, and Oklahoma, I think, have got 3 or 4 picks or something crazy. 3. So, it's going to be an interesting night. I mean, it always is. It seems like it's come earlier this year for some reason, but that could just be the sort of COVID body clock.
So the last thing on the draft that's I'm going to be interested is, so Evan Mobley's predicted to be picked 7th, which is Houston. And one of his most comparable players, I think, is Christian Wood, who already plays for the Rockets. So if they do land him, I'd actually be really interested to watch that team of like 2 sort of super long, rangy shooters in the big position. So that'll be interesting to see. Moving on. Olympic basketball. Have you been able to watch many of the Olympic games so far?
So as a man who's in our double clutch Slack, you will realise that I've been moaning about Eurosport's lack of commentary over the weekend, because I tuned in to watch Germany versus Italy the other night or the other morning, and there was no comms, and this was on, I don't know, Eurosport Channel 5 or something. So I think they've decided anything that's over like 3 channels doesn't get any commentary. So it was a bit disconcerting, but yeah, I based that decision on what you had said previously on the pod 2 weeks ago about Italy being somebody to watch, and they locked Germany down in the final 2 or 3 minutes of that game. They just could not score. And Gallinari again just stepping up and having an incredible game. Is it Stefano Tanut who plays in the Italian league? He had an incredible game as well. I'm surprised he's not, he might be on some NBA radars in the future. But yeah, I've managed to watch a few games, only brief highlights of the France-USA game, but it was on at silly o'clock or whatever. So there's been some early games that you've got to really dedicate yourself to. But if I can find a channel that's got some commentary, that'd be quite helpful.
Yeah, it's good you mentioned the Italy game. I think that was actually, in terms of just like entertainment as an actual game, that was probably the best game so far, because Germany definitely looked like the better team in the first half of that game, and they looked like the more talented team, to be honest, as well. But the Italians, through like insane shooting and defense, and because they're a lot smaller than Germany as well. So the other guy who caught my eye was Simone Fontecchio, who actually was Italy's top scorer in that game, over Gallinari even. So yeah, they were super fun to watch, and that is a really open group. So winning that game over Germany could be the ingredient Italy need to qualify. USA France was a weird watch for me. So I watched France beat USA live in China at the 2019 World Cup.
Yes, you did.
I thought that was a very different USA team. That was young guys. I think Middleton and Tatum were the only repeat players, and Tatum didn't even play because he got injured in game 1 of that tournament. So I was expecting USA to come in like super fired up, restoring pride for the country, all that sort of thing. And it was like they were not the same players you see in the NBA.
Yeah. Damian
Lillard was like super hesitant to shoot. Kevin Durant had more fouls than made field goals. Drew Holiday was probably the best player for USA, and he was like hours off, like getting off the plane from the finals. So
yeah. Well, the excuses are coming out, aren't they? We had 3 players or whatever who just landed because they were in the NBA finals like 2 days before. So, and apparently Damian Lillard's trying to play badly to speed up his departure from Portland, which is a stupid idea. Yeah, it's crazy, but it speaks to the growth of the global game that we mentioned the other week. Like, and France's youth teams as well. We mentioned that the other week. It's not going to end. These European teams and these world teams are going to get better, America. So you kind of have to start taking this seriously. Like, there was a certain period, of the last 50 years where you were probably the dominant powerhouse. You were the dominant powerhouse in the sport, but it's a global game now, and we're seeing that in the NBA. We've got a European MVP, a European NBA Finals MVP, and the game is changing, and I think we've started to see that. I mean, America might warm up, but isn't that the first time they've lost an Olympic opener since 2004 or something crazy? So
a single game, even.
Yeah,
not just an opener. Yeah.
So it's an interesting. Weirdly, I put a bet on, and actually I got away with France winning, so I was quite happy with that one. But yeah, I mean, the opening weekend for the FIBA games was interesting. I thought Australia looked good. Patty Mills stepped up big time for them. Doncic always does, yeah. And Doncic, who we obviously mentioned earlier, just going totally bonkers in his debut. And I think Slovenia have now won 14 straight games. I don't think he's lost in that jersey. Oh, well, based on a FIBA stat that I saw earlier. So
Luka is at the level where if you catch him on the right day, you cannot believe there is a better player in the world than him. When he can't miss, and he's like got the passing, and he's as big as he is, and like, yeah, it's
well, didn't he got in trouble a few years ago, didn't he? He got in trouble 2 years ago for saying that the NBA, it was easy to score in the NBA. Yeah. And everyone was like, no, you're wrong. And now look at what he's doing in the international game as well. Like, maybe that's part of the thing that puts off some of the American players, is the sort of physicality of, because there's no 3-second defensive violations and things like that. So you can it probably is a tougher game. And Luka has been playing this since he was 12 or whatever, so it's just second nature to him.
The thing I really like in FIBA rules in general is players don't get the BS foul calls that they do in the NBA, where they actively chase getting a foul. So I think that's just a massive improvement in watching games.
A lot quicker. They actually end on time as well. That's nice. Instead of like we had game 5 or whatever it was in the finals the other week, it took half an hour for the final 2 minutes or something. It's just ridiculous.
So with time in mind, let's move on. I wanted to talk about NBA 2K22 a little bit. What are your early impressions? Have you seen much of the upcoming game?
To be honest, besides the cover athletes, I haven't seen that much. But the fact that Candace Parker's got on the front cover is massive for the women's game and speaks to the growth of the WNBA over the past few seasons. But they always put out a consistently strong product. So I've got no doubt they'll do the same this year. Be interested to see if the next gen one's a little bit more next gen this year. I felt like last year was a transitioning period for a lot of the sports game franchises.
Very elitist of me, but I was almost hoping it wouldn't be a multi-gen type.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Don't have it on previous consoles. Yeah,
it feels like it has to be dumbed down a little bit for the older consoles.
Yeah, I think you kill quite a lot of the market if you did that, though.
I get it.
The problem.
I get it.
So,
one of the weird things I read today is that there's actually a side career option this year to be a rapper, basically. Is that something you can see yourself doing?
No, not really, if I'm being completely honest. As somebody who solely lives in the realm of my league or my GM, I don't tend to touch my career. I've played my team a few. I mean, I know you're big into your my team, and I know a few others who do double clutch R. So my team's like the way to go. But yeah, the biggest problem I have with the 2K franchise, and I'm probably going to talk with 2K UK here, is sort the servers out. Because I've tried to play on PlayStation and Xbox over the last few years, and it's a totally different game trying to play on the online versus sitting on a couch with your mate. Like, when we've played at events and things in person, it's an incredible experience, and it is, from the gameplay perspective, the best sports game you can possibly get, presentation, everything. But when you take it online, I don't know, the servers especially in the UK, just seem to completely heave. And I know it's a top-selling game. It always blew my mind because one of my friends was a store manager at Game, and it was always one of the sort of top 25 selling titles of the years, which always blew my mind. But it speaks to the growth of the game again in this country. So yeah, just fix the servers, please, so that we can actually have some online games that don't end up with us just complaining about lag.
I think one of the things I was excited to read about what they're looking to change in this game is they're focusing on defense and making it and both in defense and things like alley-oops and driving and things like that. They're trying to create more of a skill gap, I think, where you can't, once you're good at the game, there's multi levels to be even better, which I think is a really good thing. But also, I don't know about you, but I found playing defense really difficult this year. It just felt like you can't stay in front of people to me, unless you've got or if you're playing my team, for example, and you've got a stupidly OP card. But the thing that happens every year, I tell myself I won't fall into my pattern of just trying to sign 90s Knicks onto my team. But there I was earlier today. Hadn't played my team in a little while. I log on and I just picked up Patrick Ewing and Larry Johnson. And there I was again in my familiar pattern before the year was out. But anyway, listeners, if 2K is your thing, Captain Kirk's going to be joined by Richard Fang on Tuesday night to chat all things NBA 2K22 while they play the current 2K over our Twitch and YouTube channels. So do check that out. And moving on to, you'll never guess why, but my personal favourite section of the pod.
Nothing but Knicks silly nonsense.
He beat you to it.
Beat me to it. Perfect. So, right, I'm going to have to lock in because this is quite a long question. Last week, a man went viral on Facebook for sharing a picture on Facebook's Rate My Plate. The abomination he created was a twisted and sinful mixture of spaghetti and hot dogs, no sauce. Not content with this seemingly mix of two random ingredients thrown in effortlessly, the story didn't end there. He'd actually gone to the effort of threading the chunks of processed lottery flesh that has loose claims to being bits of animal through the spaghetti. Presumably, this is done prior to cooking and then boiling this mistake of nature in a single saucepan. My question to you is, who do you speculate is the worst cook in the world of basketball and why?
I'm sure you bang your head every Sunday night when you come up with these things. I don't know, but I had to instantly go towards the 235-40 pound Lamar Odom when he was having his breakdown because he was, cooked on all kinds of drugs. So I would imagine whatever he cooked during that poor period of his life was quite awful. So I would go with Lamar Odom. I mean, I did try and tie it into players in the NBA who had Cook as their surname, but I think there's Quinn Cook and a couple of others, but it wasn't as cool as I thought it was going to be, so I left that.
So I really tried to put a lot of effort into this, and I learned as a result, it's really difficult to find any information about good or bad cooks in the NBA.
Yes, yeah.
What I did learn, Chris Bosh is apparently good at cooking. Serge Ibaka,
he has a cooking show.
Exactly. And all his teammates go on about how good at cooking he is. So those guys were immediately out, but that still left a whole lot of current and former players. So what I've actually gone for is completely speculating about someone's personality. And for that reason, I've picked Grayson Allen because he looks like a really stereotypical entitled US frat boy.
Yes.
And just by that probably completely wrong stereotype of him, I've assumed he's terrible at cooking.
No, I get that entirely. It's why it made sense when the Utah Jazz drafted him, because he fitted into that sort of super white fan base that you've got there. So it made sense. Yeah, Grayson Allen, overprivileged, but that's a good one.
Moving swiftly on from that weird topic to Talking on D. This is our Discord server where we bring the NBA UK community together to chat all things basketball and nonsense and otherwise.
WWE.
Do please join if you're not already a part of it. Some of the topics this year were the past week were. One that was actually this morning is League Pass good or bad? And this was brought up by me. I use a lot of digital platforms now, and League Pass, in my opinion, is one of the worst for its inconsistently of its availability. Whatever smart TV you have, it's a bit of a lottery as to whether you'll be able to get the NBA app. And as far as I'm aware, it is on Xbox, but not PlayStation. And it doesn't really work well in desktop browsers compared to mobile and other things. Like, it took them years to generate the ability to download games, and you think they're working on features, and then all they do is put the bloody trivia thing that I literally have never met anyone who actually likes that feature.
Yes, yeah.
But simple stuff that should be there, like watching half a game, closing the app, going back in, and it remembering where you were in a game, and not having to restart the full 3 hours game or whatever. Simple stuff like that is unforgivable in my eyes with how many years along we are now with League Pass. But anyway, other people, they seem to like it, but they're wrong.
I think I agree with several of your points, and there's some really annoying bugs on the sort of tablet versions recently where you click the game and it starts playing, but it keeps the menu in front of the game, so you can't see the game. But there's always been problems. I mean, I bought an Apple TV when they first came out because that was the only thing that you could get the NBA app on, because it's not on tellies like you were saying. So, and it's the same with other sports. I mean, it is on PlayStation, but only if you've got an American account, which is an absolute ball ache. So you can watch on Xbox, which is the nice, easy way to do it. But Xbox is the smaller selling platform in Europe, so it doesn't make any sense for it to be, for that to be the easiest platform to be accessible on. So, and for the money you pay, you would expect there to be several changes and implementations. So, yeah.
Another topic was where can people watch the Olympic basketball games. And
That's a good
just
one.
to clarify, if you're listening to this and you are also wanting to ask that question, some of the games are going to be on the BBC, but the BBC only has the rights to show 2 live events of any type at the Olympics at any one time. So you can never guarantee you're going to be able to see. If you think, oh, that USA game, I really want to watch that, you can't guarantee it's going to be on the BBC or not. So Eurosport has the rights across Europe, which incredibly they haven't advertised or marketed in any way.
No.
But so that's been a learning experience. So some people have it on Sky. Other people like myself, I paid $6.99 for a month of Discovery Plus, which includes the Eurosport stuff. So either of those options work if you have Sky or if you don't have Sky. Moving to our Discord listener questions, and we got some interesting ones this week. So one is from Flying Tortoise. What teams, if any, will come back to earth with a bump next season? Okay, who were this season's overachievers? And I think you already hinted at one of your answers for this question potentially.
Yeah, I think the Suns overachieved. I mean, Chris Paul comes in, grabs them, pulls them to a finals. Everything falls, in their direction, and then they get beaten by a team that's got the one thing that they don't have, a lot of. So, and we'll see what happens with them next year to see whether they come back. Another team that probably overachieved this year was the Knicks, but who cares? It's the Knicks, and we enjoyed it. And seeing Madison Square Garden packed to the rafters for the playoffs was the most normal thing in the last 18 months for all of us. So, we really enjoyed that. But it was a strange season. Some teams were really bad, like the Houston Rockets, who only won 17 games. And then, you had the opposite end of that where the Jazz won 52 and they looked like they were on, autopilot for most of the season. So, yeah, I think it was the Knicks and the Suns really who were the teams that would probably come back with a bump. But if they re-sign Chris Paul, then I don't think they'll have any problems. But I think the Knicks, certainly, they ran off Julius Randle for most of the season.
The Knicks, in my opinion, is an interesting one in that I'm not sold on them until we see actually what their roster looks like. I think it's difficult to say either way because, listeners, if you have not seen the Knicks contract situation currently, I've been banging on about it for weeks. But literally half the roster is out of contract this summer. So there's a huge amount of uncertainty, and the reason it's deliberate, obviously, because the Knicks currently are pursuing a policy of trying to sign the best players they possibly can, and if they can't sign elite players, signing vets to 1 or 2 year cap-friendly deals, and they're in a renewal phase now. So half the roster is out of contract. So it's difficult for me to say. Don't get me wrong; they really could be awful next season, depending on how their roster fills out. But it also could be better than last year if they do land. I'm not going to say any names because no one seems like it's close or realistic at this point. But let's say they landed another big player to pair with Randall. They could also be way better. So they're a difficult one to know if they'll be. Well, they'll definitely finish lower than 4th because if Atlanta's anything like they were healthy in the playoffs, they're going to be better. Yeah. But there's a few teams I think may have some existential questions to ask. And for me, in the East, I look at Miami, who had after their trip to the finals, had a real down year. And I think they have to look, if they have another year where they're the 6th seed and just not that good again, they really have to start asking questions about whether they need to rebuild. And I actually look at Boston in a similar way where there's no big timeline for those guys because obviously the Brown and Tatum are as young as they are and as good as they are. But if they're not significantly better than last season, because last season was really bad by their standards of the prior seasons for them, they need to ask questions about the rest of the roster because they can't just be they can't sit there and hope Brown and Tatum are just happy to not contend because they're good enough where they're going to want to contend. And there's lots of players who have sentimental attachments to the team and the fans and everything, like Marcus Smart and everything, who is being bandied around in like every trade rumor currently. But yeah, Boston for me, if they don't have a vastly improved season next year, they have to look at the rest of the roster. In the West, we already talked about them. Utah, I think, top seed last season, and I don't know. If I was a Jazz fan, I wouldn't be going into next season with a huge amount of hope, especially as, like, let's say the Lakers are unbelievable next year and they're healthy and they just destroy everyone, and the Jazz are like the 3 or 4 seed. Why would you be confident that they would do better than they did this year? Like,
yeah, the Clippers and the Lakers could take big step up next year if they're all healthy, but Kawhi's going to be out for quite a significant chunk, and yeah, the West is going to be in a bit of turmoil because you look at what Dallas want to do, with that Kristaps Luka thing. It's obviously not working very well, so that could all change. Damian Lillard in Portland, Memphis are obviously making moves, as we said already. Golden State. So
the other team I look at, and again, it's not really coming down to earth because they weren't good this year, but what are the Spurs doing? They're stuck in like stasis where they have like a roster full of mediocre to good players, but they're in the West, so they're not going to get a playoff spot. And I don't know. I just don't really understand the strategy there currently.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are the teams I would pick for those. Moving on to another weird question, the ones I enjoy. This one is from our own Mike Miller. As someone suffering with the effects of male pattern baldness, Fournier, this is Evan Fournier, his hair fascinates me. Is it going? Isn't it going? Who is your first all MVP, as in male pattern baldness, first team? And then just to make it more complicated, Matt Hardy, UK Nets fans, he also chimed in on this topic saying, can we have a fully embraced MVP versus a time to let it go team too? Did you get time to put these rosters together?
I've got a sort of male pattern baldness team, but I don't have the time to let it go team because that would require me to analyze the level of fade on said players' hairs. But Reddit does have a really handy. Leave that to me. Reddit does have a really handy list of 500 bald NBA players, so I can happily share that for everybody if they want to have a nose. But yeah, there's certainly some interesting players on there.
So who was your 5 that you picked?
Well, I had I went by position, but I could have really messed around with it. I had Magic Johnson or Alex Caruso at point guard, aka the bald mamba. Vince Carter at shooting guard, Scottie Pippen or Clyde Drexler at small forward.
Oh, Clyde is a good one.
And then at power forward, there was a bunch of dudes who I can remember off the top of my head. Now, I'm just going to say it out loud. Charlie Villanova is the guy with no hair, like absolutely none. If you scanned his hair, there's nothing. So it's got to be him. Karl Malone, Taj Gibson, Kevin Garnett, Al Harrington. There's a bunch of power forwards who don't have a lot of hair. So those guys. Brendan Hayward at center. So that would be my 5. I'm sure if I could put Shaq on there and Michael Jordan and Kobe and people like that and have a great team, but I just went for some sort of random names that I've picked off the list from Reddit.
So I thought about this a little bit differently, and my 2 5s are, I have 1 5 where, and these were just the first who came into my head as I listed them, of guys who just their whole career, basically, they shaved their head cleanly. So it was actually like quite difficult to work out quite how bald they were or were not. Which is
some players tend to lose their hair for 1 season and then it comes back.
Yeah. So I had Nick Van Exel, MJ, Barkley, Abdul-Jabbar, and Shaq. Guys who just like they were really clean. Maybe they were hiding their baldness by like being so clean shaven. I don't know. And so that was my speculative 5, but this is the real 5. These are guys who I have real evidence that there is male pattern baldness taking place on these gentlemen. So I've got Caruso at point guard because unavoidable. I've got LeBron, well established bald guy. Kevin Durant, slightly underrated bald guy compared to LeBron. I feel like he's maybe even a bit more bald than LeBron because KD's thinning out on top as well. So KD is definitely in there. I had Karl Malone. You had him as well. Drexler, I wish I'd thought of. That's a great shout for you. Then my sleeper on this team, because he never gets talked about for any reason at all, and he deserves a shout out because he has excellent baldness, is Cody Zeller. He is, not only is he like a sneaky, effective roller and driver at getting to the hoop, but also absolute sleeper in the male pattern baldness stakes.
Just giggling at Carlos Boozer popping up on the Twitch screen.
With his like felt tipped on hair at one point. Yeah. That was exciting.
Yeah. That's the level of detail the Reddit list is in as well, because it says like at one point. So they've found every point where a player has had a bald spot and just gone with it. So, you know, Darren Williams is on there, and I'm pretty sure he had hair for most of his career.
Yeah. I feel like it's unfair as well to include guys who like play until they're like 40 and are like only balding at the point that they're 40. That's a bit harsh. Okay, and that actually draws us to the end of the show. Any final thoughts, remarks?
Not that I can think of. We don't have any games of the week because the NBA season's finished. But watch the Olympic Games, people. Find them on Eurosport and listen to them with no commentary, like I did.
And a big thanks to Captain Kirk for, as ever, making the magic happen on this show. Do join us live on Twitch Monday at 9 every week if you do not already. We enjoy the witty banter that comes from live interaction. Thanks for everyone dropping in tonight. Thank you to Matthew Wellington for joining me today. Do catch us on all the social channels you'd expect to find us on at Double Clutch UK. Thank you to James Wakeling for following us on Twitter. You legend. And don't forget to, if you do have Amazon Prime, subscribe to our Twitch channel. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything, but it helps us. So do that as well, because we told you to. And on that bombshell, I will bid you all good evening.
Thank you very much.
I'm training for the Olympics and I need absolute concentration.
Oh dear.